How's the weather in Singapore?
Very sunny and hot as always. How's it over there in
Well,
KL?
sunny and hot. It's either that or it's going to be rainy.
Or it's going to be
So
tropical rainstorms. Yeah, no, we're we're not that at the moment.
very excited about today's show with our guests, and obviously, I have an affinity for this because she is from my home state. So, and I'm very proud of this young lady and that all that she's achieved and what she's doing. To promote, the indigenous community. I'm sure this was the first time you've heard of these groups, right? When
Yeah, for me,
yeah,
but I have
right.
to say, when I was a young person growing up, I did go to Kuching, and I've had this shield, for 20 plus years, Frida. I
Right.
actually love it. It's a very treasured uh, item
And
that I have.
it's been with you around the world.
It has, from
Okay.
Vietnam to Malaysia to Singapore now, and it's traveled with me everywhere. So yes.
All right. For those of you who are joining us, later on, if you have any questions for our guests, of course, feel free to ask her as well. And it will know a little bit about the community, what she's doing. And this is like, in Sarawak, there's a lot of people. There are a lot of different groups. The major ones being Ibans and Bidayus. And I just did my DNA test, so I think I've got a bit. I would be, I think, 35% of Bidayu heritage, just from the location of where my family is. But anyway, yes, we'll get started right now.
Yes, so on August 9th, here we were in Singapore, we were celebrating National Day, but globally it was the International Day of the Indigenous People. So more than 86% of Indigenous people globally work in the informal economy. So that's compared to 66% for their non-Indigenous counterparts. So Indigenous people are nearly 3 times as likely to be living in extreme poverty compared to their non-Indigenous counterparts. So globally, 47% of all Indigenous peoples in employment have no education. That's again compared to 17% of their non-Indigenous counterparts. So this gap is even wider for women. Indigenous women are the backbone of the Indigenous peoples' communities and play a crucial role in the preservation and transmission of traditional ancestral knowledge. So keeping the ancestral knowledge alive, we have our next guest, and let me introduce her by way of a video.
Right, this is very exciting, everybody. All right. So what you saw there was Sape. I'm going to introduce her right now. Okay, here's my light going on and off. So Alena Murang is a Borneo-born Dayak European living in KL who sings in the endangered languages of Kelabit and Kenya. Ignore my light. Dayak are the native people of Borneo, and she's one of the first women to play the sape, which is a lute instrument from Borneo, traditionally and reserved for male healers, right? So sometimes you do think of the what's that thing in Australia? The didgeridoo, right? So deeply influenced by the lives of ancestors, coupled with influences of rock and folk, her shows are a journey of past and present along the mighty Baram River that runs from the coast to the highlands of Borneo to the world's oldest rainforest. And Alena is also a dancer, sape teacher, and visual artist. And with that, let me bring her on. Good morning, Alena.
Good
Welcome.
morning. How are you guys?
Good, so good to have you joining us here today.
Yeah, it's
Um,
great to see you.
so let's start off with people not knowing about the different kinds of people that we have in Sarawak.
Yes. Well, I think there are about 27, how do you say, like registered or
You're right.
officially recognized tribes
Yeah.
in Sarawak. But in reality, I think there are about 40 to 50 different Indigenous groups in Sarawak. Many are not officially recognized by the government yet, although a bill has just been passed to do that. And these groups, a lot of them are very different from each other, even though their livelihoods might look the same, their houses might look the same, but the languages that we speak, our histories, they're all, well, mostly very different.
Right.
And many of these groups come from Austronesian heritage. So that means that we likely, our ancestors likely left Taiwan about, I think it was 10,000 years ago, traveled by the sea through the Philippines, Borneo, Malaya, off to Madagascar,
Right.
and then down to New Zealand, and then the Pacific Islands, Tahiti, Easter Island.
Wow.
So we're all from the same language group, which is
Right.
Austronesian.
Right. Just before, I wanted to know as well, I think just recently they also announced two new dialect groups that have, that have appeared. And I'm like, well, I've never even heard of these.
In Sarawak?
In Sarawak.
Oh.
I'll do some research as we're talking right now, but I'm sure Rianne also has a question for you.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for sharing that. That's really fascinating because it's something that I obviously didn't know. And, you said almost 50 different groups. So I guess the main question is, you are living in KL. I mean, have a lot of Indigenous people now moved to the cities?
Yeah, so from my father's generation, they were the first to leave the rainforest and to migrate to cities, even different countries. We do have a lot of relatives overseas, and we always joke that wherever in the world we go, we can always find a Kelabit person to stay with, and that's now called our global longhouse. And my generation, I love it too. And my generation were the first to be born outside of the rainforest, and so even in KL, there's a lot of cousins, and there are a lot of indigenous peoples from Sarawak and Sabah as well.
Okay, and the global longhouse, right? Now, for those who have stayed, right? I'm just thinking, right? What would be their income sources?
Those that stayed in the kampong, in the village. So a lot of their income source now is still from jungle produce. So farm produce, rice, the rice that the Kelabits plant is, I'm not being biased, but it's one of the best. It's one of the best in the country or the world.
Represent.
Vouch for that. And also, actually, a lot of the men, the older men and the young men, are employed by the logging companies over there.
Right.
So whether it's to drive, to fell the trees, to make plywood, I think that's a large source of income. My father also always taught us that our role as working in the city and living in the city is also to send money back home.
Right. And this is the barrio rice you're talking about, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And I'm not biased. It is the best.
It's great, right?
Of course, I'm not biased. I'm not biased.
I'm really wanting to try it now. I'm
Rianne. Okay, we're going to sort you out, Rianne. Okay.
Yeah, I feel left out. No, I'm joking. All right, well, so could you just share a bit more about some of the traditions then of the Kelabits? And is it similar to the Kenyas? I guess most are Christians now. So what has been kept and what has been discarded of traditions through the years?
So with Kenya and Kelabit people, our languages are different. You wouldn't be able to know one and understand the other. But because we live quite closely to each other, our villages can be quite near each other. So culture was adopted and blended. So for example, the sape was actually originated from the Kenya people and then adopted and embraced by the Kelabit people. And one of the best traditions of the Kelabit is the name changing ceremonies. So throughout your life, you could have one name, but if you have a child, you are given another name because you're taking on a new
responsibility.
Okay. Yeah, you become a new person in a way. And when you're a grandparent, you get given another name, and your old name is no longer used anymore. And there are ceremonies every time there's a name changing ceremony for a couple.
Right. So you haven't had your name changed? Have you had your name changed?
No. So I was born with a Kelabit name, which is Lipang.
Okay.
And if and when I have a child, it will get changed. And the couple share the name.
Huh.
Yeah.
So who decides on the name?
This is what Rianne does. The couple change the name. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
What do you mean?
Oh, so my husband and I, we ended up merging our surnames together. So his surname was Lovell and mine was Boland. So we're now both Lovell Boland.
You see, so okay, so you adopted there was a transfer of technology, right, in terms of the sape, and
Yes.
so how? Okay, so this is very interesting. People have not heard the sape before. How did you pick up the sape as it was, I guess as I traditionally reserved for male healers, and how did that change?
Well, looking back, I think that because a lot of these traditions skipped my father's generation, because of a number of factors. Because as kids, his generation was the first to go off to school, and it was boarding school, so they didn't spend a lot of time with parents, so there was no transmission of culture, or the oral traditions, and more emphasis was put on learning English and hopefully going to get a job and going to university. And the other reason is because Christianity came into the highlands in early 1900s, and the whole process um, of, of, of the people embracing Christianity maybe went up to the 1960s, even 1970s. So because a lot of our music and our art was linked to the past belief systems, it was therefore just dropped,
Right.
But I think like throughout time, people realized that there are tunes on the sape that were not linked to rituals, were not linked to the spirit world. We call that the human sape. There was a sape Bali, the spirit sape, which was for ritual. So when I was a young child, like 6 or 7, I was learning dancing, and the dancing is to sape music.
Right.
Then about 3 years later, my cousins and I wanted to change up the tunes a little bit, make it faster, make it shorter or longer. So we thought, hey, why don't some of us go and learn the sape? So it was a bit naive at the time. We didn't really know the significance of what we were doing. And we approached Uncle Matthew now. I think you know Matthew now. To teach us the sape. He was one of the very few sape players in Kuching at that time. I think there were maybe 5 people. And I only realized much later, I think about 6 or 7 years ago, when I was doing an interview with him, the reporter asked Uncle Matthew, why did you want to teach these girls the sape, if it was to me? And he said that when we asked him, he went back home and thought very, very, very hard if he should be teaching us young girls the sape. And he thought to himself, nobody is, hardly anybody is learning sape, and so I want to teach them.
Right,
so
and
the students.
I can just imagine, like what you've done. You've actually sort of revitalized and like a girl playing it, so like people pay attention to it. And you're right, right? A lot of people have lost the interest, and if you hadn't, you and a few other people, but this is so important, yeah.
Yeah, I have to credit our mothers a lot.
Yes. Yes.
And it's really interesting that you said that you kind of wanted to modernize the songs. So, I mean, and you mentioned, of course, that your father's generation weren't really picking up these traditions. So are the younger generation now picking up the sape, and how are they relating to these tunes? Are they modernizing them as well?
They are picking up the sape now. It's so amazing to see. I think it's been so, I don't even know the word for it, like
heartening,
otherworldly, just seeing how we thought this instrument that was going to die has just done a complete flip. And in the last 10, 15 years, it's been growing, and it's so commonplace now.
Right.
You can find teachers, and I know my friend Elizabeth is teaching a lot of kids in Kuching with their little baby sapes. Baby sape didn't used to exist. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So a lot of people are picking up, and my oldest student was 80,
Right. Okay. So, and I know, I'm sure you're part Bengkel, Borneo, Bengkel.
Yes.
And it's so, and this is under sape falls under the lute family, and actually beyond the sape, there's so many other types of lutes as well. It's like, whoa, I didn't know there were so many things.
Exactly. There are still so many instruments in Borneo that are not known. They're not known. They're dying out.
I saw you perform, of course, at the Rainforest Music Festival that was held recently, and of course, I visited the Borneo Bengkel, and I was like, "There's so many types." I was like, I thought there was only one type of sape, and there was so many types of lute instruments, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I would just want to go back to the Kelabit community, right? Are they dwindling in numbers? I know it's a very small community, and is there anything to increase the numbers? What's happening?
Well, I think in terms of numbers, we've actually increased in the past years. Obviously, like a lot of kids now are mixed like me.
Yeah, okay.
But I think in terms of us Kelabits that practice the tradition of name changing, for example, or songs, or can speak the language, I think that's getting more and more diluted, and you can see it from our language, which is currently listed as endangered.
Right.
Those lists, the UN list on the ethnologue. So I think it's more a matter of identity and how you identify as a Kelabit. Obviously, for me, that might be different from my next cousin. Yeah, and there's still conversations that we go through. My mom's an anthropologist, and it's her favorite question to ask us cousins.
Okay.
What does it mean to be Kelabit?
How does it mean to be Kelabit? Okay.
How do you feel?
You touched on a little bit about the language and how it's sadly, endangered. I mean, is there anything being done to preserve the language?
Apart from
Right now?
songs, yeah.
Oh yeah, apart from songs. In daily life, I guess.
Sadly, I think there's not really a big effort on a community level. There was a dictionary that came out, like Kelabit English dictionary, that came out, written by an American man actually in the 1990s. But I heard that this year one of the Kelabit uncles has written his own version of the dictionary.
Right.
So that's
Right.
coming out because our language hadn't been written down, and there's so much discussion or arguments over what's the right spelling for a word, how to spell, do we use apostrophes or Q's and stuff like that. So
Okay.
I guess we're getting there as a community, but I really wish we had some Kelabit classes maybe that I could go to and sit in, but maybe that's not the best way to learn this language. I really need to
I
go
guess,
to the
like you
village.
mentioned, it's very much an oral tradition.
Yeah.
I guess that's the thing I kind of relate it to is when my mum was teaching me how to cook. It's like you don't write it down, you just like follow it. You just follow.
You just do it.
A pinch here.
Yeah. A bit of this, a bit of that. You just learn by kind of seeing and following
And doing.
Yeah, exactly.
So interesting that the first dictionary was written by an American man.
Yeah, very interesting.
Another anthropologist, actually.
Okay, and of course, if you have any questions for Alena, yeah, please feel free to ask her. And also, and you brought that up now, being half European, half English, half Italian anthropologist mother, and and Kelabit dad. Do you see things differently? Do you think you know, do you appreciate a little bit more? Looking at things. I'm just wondering.
Actually, my deep appreciation for the arts that we have in Borneo came when I left Kuching after SPM when I was 17 and went to college in the UK, and I was in the UK for 5 years. And I remember my lecturer asked me in front of a group of British students, do you like living in the UK? And I, not really knowing the definition of culture back then, I said, I really think that the UK lacks culture, because for me, culture was like our outfits, our beats, our instruments, and our music, and our dances. And I didn't see what is an English dance? I couldn't connect. I mean, obviously now
around the maypole,
the
maybe.
UK has a lot of culture. But that's when I really realized we have something so special in Sarawak, and that's where I guess that's where my appreciation started to become bigger and bigger, and my love for the arts and the music was just a lot bigger. And it's funny, like people say you only know it when
you're away.
Yeah, when you have an outside view.
Right.
Yes.
You never appreciate it when you're back home.
Yes.
Exactly. It's true.
It's like they say that if you live in Paris, you'll never go and see the Eiffel Tower,
Oh,
It's only when visitors come, then you'll kind of like explore your own city, right, or
Yeah,
town
yeah,
or village. Yeah. Well, of
yeah.
course, the reason that we're talking to you is because it was the UN Indigenous Peoples Day on August 9th. So, I mean, from your experience, do you think these days that highlighting Indigenous people's culture is actually helping with the transmission of knowledge through the generations?
I think it does help with awareness. For example, I'm like a social media junkie, and these days, no matter what day it is, whether it's Indigenous Peoples Day or Pride or something, it becomes a time when, for example, us Indigenous creators will have a louder voice and a more collective voice on social media. And so I think, in that way, it does help in terms of, impact on the livelihood, like direct impact on the livelihood of Indigenous peoples. I personally haven't seen it. Maybe in other parts of the world where, UNESCO's are stronger, there might be,
right.
but not here in Malaysia.
Okay. So before we talk about your new single, which is a very interesting story, but you had a lovely hit in with a beautiful video, The Warrior Spirit. Tell us about that one and what inspired you to come up with Warrior Spirit. Check out the video, guys, if you haven't. I'll put it on the link
It's
later on, but
beautiful.
it's beautiful.
Thank
And of
you.
course, and we'll talk about that first, that song, before we get to your new single.
Warrior Spirit, it's an instrumental song, and I describe it basically as the meditation of the warrior before he goes into battle, or she.
Or she.
Or she. Um, and we wanted the video to show that semangat, or show that spirit of
Spirit.
the warrior.
Mm.
And we come from a long line of warriors and headhunters, and we wanted to honor that spirit and to see how it's still embodied in our generation today. We don't literally go out and have battles. And it actually so happened that we released it during Gawai last year, just before the
Mm.
Harvest Festival, which also came at a time of another lockdown. And I actually heard from a lot of frontliners at the time that it became their theme song when they were putting on their PPE,
Wow.
and they're like doctors commenting. And I just felt like everything does have a correct time and place. It was actually, the release of the video was actually very delayed, out of our control.
Mm.
Yeah, and for the outfits, I think we planned for 5 outfits. We actually ended up having 12 outfits, and we wanted the outfits to have Sarawakian elements, but really show the feminine strength and
Right.
that feminine side of a warrior.
Right. Where was it? Where was it filmed?
It was filmed in KL. There were 2
Right.
locations. One was
Oh.
in Selangor, in a durian farm.
Okay.
Yeah, if you see those trees in the mist, they're durian trees.
Okay.
And yeah, another one was kind of in a sandy, not beach, what do you call it, like a river mouth area.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. This is short. Okay. All right. So tell me about Put Burui.
Put Burui, we just released a few days ago, and Put means blowpipe.
Okay.
Burui is the guy's or the hunter's name, so Burui's blowpipe. And this song is a traditional Kenyah song meant for female dancers, or a
Oh.
group of female dancers who dance the hornbill dance. And for those that don't know, like the dances, we dance with hornbill feathers on our
Yes.
head, right? And usually about 5 to 8 hornbills would need to be killed for one dancer's dancing set.
Right.
And a vision that I had for so long was to replace those feathers with leaves, with fern leaves. And that's what we managed to do in the video, which I'm most excited about. But really, the idea for this video, which is before it comes a short film, it came from just wanting to show how close our Indigenous arts and Indigenous music, how it's really born from nature. If we, artists all around the world were influenced and impacted by our immediate environment, and that's what my ancestors knew. They only knew the natural environment. They didn't know cars and concrete and money. And so what they wrote and what they created was all born from our rainforests and our rivers. And that's all I wanted to show, like how much nature gives to us.
That's so interesting. Yeah. And I love, as soon as you mentioned that you use the leaves instead, I was like, oh, that's a really cool kind of way of keeping the tradition alive, but in a modern way, maybe upcycling it in a more contemporary way, which I kind of think is really special that you did that.
No hornbills were killed in the process.
Yeah.
Of this video.
No, I should have put that at the start, hey?
Yeah.
Right.
So I guess.
Go on.
Sorry, continue.
That's how culture stays alive, by adapting and keeping relevant. And I think as Indigenous people, a lot of the time, we feel the pressure to look a certain way or to be a certain way. But actually, if we look at, for example, my grandmother's generation, my grandmother would have changed a song to her own context. She would have changed the lyrics, and she would have had a different outfit from what her great grandmother had, based on what was available to them at the time.
Right.
So us changing and adapting is not really changing the past. It's basically just doing what we've always done, and
not losing the
alive.
Not losing the essence of what
Exactly.
Keeping the spirit alive, kind of as you were mentioning. Well, I mean, I guess on that note, how can the public at large actually keep or try to preserve the Indigenous people's way of life?
I think it's really to support Indigenous creators, because you have Indigenous creators, and then you have people that ask Indigenous artists to do things a certain way. You know what I mean? And I think the best thing that you can do is just support Indigenous creators directly, whether that's just putting a like on their YouTube page, there's those free ways, sharing what they're making, and just, helping them to promote their work, to purchasing their work. Just support the Indigenous creators directly. I think that's the strongest way.
Right. Thanks, Sean. Awesome stuff. He says, thanks for enlightening us. And I will post the link to both Warrior Spirit and also put Burui on the in the comments later. So thank you so much, Alena, for spending this Saturday with us. Alena Murang, my fellow Sarawaki friend. I'm Frida Liu.
I'm Rianne Lovell-Boland, and this has been Causeway Conversations, Bridging the Sustainability Gap. And do watch out, we have our next conversation will be on September 10th, and we'll be talking about the International Day of Blue Skies.
Blue Skies,
Thank you so much.
and so we will close with playing that little short clip from Put Burui again. Thank you, Alena, and I will close everybody so we can focus on that beautiful piece of video. Bye, Alena.
Thank you. Great to speak with you.
Okay, I'm going to close you too. And then I guess I can't close myself, but there you go.